You're listening to the Bluejay Breakdown with Anna Bellinghausen.
Welcome into the Bluejay Breakdown. I'm Anna Bellinghausen along with Andrew Rogers, who graciously
as if we don't share an office.
His presence.
We have to spend more time together.
But now we're here on the Bluejay Breakdown. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no, I love talking about this Creighton team.
Heck yeah.
They're fun.
Here to talk about the Creighton men's basketball team. 4 games into the season so far. Andrew, from what you've seen, what's impressed you most?
I think it's just the immediate chemistry that this team has out of the gate. They had their woes shooting the ball against St. Thomas, and that's expected, though. First game of the year, you're trying to get back into the swing of things, the groove, the first actual game of the year, right? Like, you can play those opponents here or there, and they can be like scrimmages or exhibition games and things like that. But when you get into the bulk of your schedule, that's like when, okay, the nerves are starting to hit and you're trying to find ways to work around, who's going to be your go-to option this year, who's going to be looked at. It's more of your passer, or, breaking up open space and finding ways to get Kalkbrenner more involved down low, because he's such a special player in itself, both offensively and defensively. So there's just like a lot of pieces that needed to be not reworked, but like almost just putting the puzzle back together. Because when you return, what was it, like 5 of the top 7 scorers from last year's NCAA tournament team, and then you add Baylor Shireman into the mix, now you're at the point to where you're like, okay, well, we just got one of the best scorers, if not the best scorer, coming out of the Summit League, and his game transitioned very well when he got to Creighton. But it's not an individual style of basketball, and that's never been the McDermott style of basketball either, which is great. They know their identity, and knowing their identity is what's going to carry them far this year especially. But what really sticks out more than anything is just not only how deep they are, but how many shooters that they have at all times in the game. When I look at like the next game against Texas Tech, and I sat back today and I thought, what do you think the Red Raiders are thinking about today? And I'm like, it's knowing where everybody is on the floor at all times. There are teams out there where you're like, oh, I could probably, help off of this player and guard the paint a little bit more, but not with this Creighton team. And they have size too, which makes them even more deadly when it comes to not the inability to play help side defense. So there's just so much good going right with this team right now, which makes them such an exciting team to watch.
And Coach Mack said yesterday against UC Riverside was going to be the biggest test for them, the toughest test. Obviously, you saw the game against St. Thomas, but Coach said UC Riverside was going to be the most athletic team that they've played so far. The score was 80-51, and Coach Mack said after that was the best game that this team's played. And when you look at it on the score sheet, 1, 2, 3, 4 different scores in double digits. So to your point, Andrew, there's so many different ways this team can get buckets. And one thing that UC Riverside did last night was try to shut down Ryan Kalkbrenner. And they sort of did in that first half. They were double teaming him in the paint. They only had 18 points from the paint. And then the second half, I think it was like over 25 points in the paint. So obviously a big difference there, but it doesn't matter if you shut one guy down. Any given night, anybody can score, and that's the best thing about this team.
And they have too many of them.
Right, and there's so many of them to shut down. And then off the bench, Mason Miller, a huge spark that we didn't get to see last year, and he's just going to be draining threes all season long.
Sharif Mitchell, too. I mean, this is an elite defender, but also somebody that just has so much athleticism when it comes to creating space on the offensive end. He provides such a quick first step off the bench, and when he does that, he gets into the paint. He's driving to the hole. Early on, it does seem like he's a little bit out of control when he goes in, so it's kind of unexpected to see him put up a shot. It's almost pass first when he's going into the lane. But by doing so, no matter what, you're going to draw the defense. And then that just opens up players all over the floor. They just have such a deep team. And, the knock on deep teams is it's better in practice than it is in games, which, to a degree, I get that, but think about like this Creighton team then. Yes, it's so great in practice, but how much does that carry over to the game?
Right.
Like they have such a deep team that they're literally playing a UC Davis, if not top 25 team on their bench. I said that the other day. You look at this bench and you're like, this team could compete with any D1 team.
Oh, yeah. And then Frederick King as well, another guy that'll be big. He had some miscues early on in the season. Of course, you're going to have that, a few turnovers that you don't like to see. And Coach Mack said the same thing. He's like, we saw some good things out of Fred. We saw some bad things out of him. And he said he'll surprise people. And also Ben Schultzberg, another guy that's just kind of waiting in the arms of Greg McDermott.
And he shot the ball well,
points.
2 games ago?
The last game, not this game, the last one. He had 12 points, so got to see a little bit of a glimpse of him. So it's great to see just the entire rotation, first string, second string, get through and into a game, because you can really see, okay, this Creighton team is really good. And knock on wood, if any injuries happen, we have guys to back it up for sure. I mean, if I'm Greg McDermott, I'm feeling very comfortable. And he said it in my preseason interview with him. This is the deepest team he's ever coached. And I think a coach of Greg McDermott's caliber, him saying that means something. And he wouldn't say it if he really, truly didn't mean it and see that with his team.
Yeah, something I really noticed with Greg too is when he's moving up and down the bench, there are more times that I see him with a smile on his face than if he's ticked off about something. And not only does that play into his relationships with these guys, but, coaches are hard on their players because they expect greatness. They have a certain expectation of their guys and they want them to meet that. But it's almost like McDermott just sits back and smiles and thinks, like, not only is my team confident enough to take a shot that maybe I'll approve of or not approve of, but just he notices how fun his team is to watch. And he knows that. Like, he'd take that in from a fan's perspective of, I get to coach these guys, but a lot of times they may be coaching me this year because he's finding out different things about different players that he didn't realize that he had coming into this season.
That's a great point. I think last season challenged McDermott the most as a coach that he's ever been challenged before, besides obviously his early coaching days when you're just getting into the grit of being a coach. But I think from his standpoint at Creighton, last year really challenged him. He had those injuries. He was basically putting a team together from scratch. He had Alex O'Connell have to step up into that starting role. He hadn't been in that position his entire career at Duke or at Creighton because the talent that was there before him. Then you bring in a transfer like Ryan Hawkins, and they go to the round of 32 and put up a great game against Kansas, the national champions. So Greg McDermott, I will say this over and over again, one of the best coaches in college basketball, probably in coaching overall. He's just a great guy. And to your point about having fun, last night in the presser, it was Coach McDermott and Ryan Kalkbrenner and then Trey Alexander next to him. And somebody asked Trey, like, oh, what'd you think about Ryan Kalkbrenner's 3? And Trey was like, oh, I loved it.
The one that went in or the one that he missed?
The one that went in. And he was like, I always encourage Ryan to take those threes, and Coach McDermott was like, shh, like only certain times. Only certain times can you take those threes. Yeah. Don't let him get too trigger happy. But I love that Kalkbrenner shooting threes, and last night he was 1 for 2, but he just looked a lot more comfortable from beyond the arc. And again, if they're going to shut him down in the paint, let the guy shoot a couple threes a game.
Kalkbrenner, he kind of had that pulmonary moment. Whenever, you let the pitcher hit. In this case, you let the big man shoot a 3.
Let the big man shoot. I'm all for it.
And, he kind of has a similar stroke to Brook Lopez, which works in the NBA. Like,
it's like the whole world's like slowing down and stopping when he
he doesn't get off the ground.
No, not
he's
at
shooting
all.
A free throw from 3.
He's got a long way to go for his arms.
But, I'll tell you what has he made? 24 of his last 25 shots or something crazy.
Yeah, he was like on a streak of, I think, 23 at one point last night until he broke it. I believe it was the missed 3 that broke his streak.
Yeah, anybody on this team could be Big East Player of the Year.
I know.
At the end of this year. I don't know who I'd choose, though.
Yeah, one guy that I think got robbed of those preseason awards, Trey Alexander.
Yep, great player.
It was just tough because we saw him do so well last year and take over a team against San Diego State. He literally took over that game in the final moments of it, and you just saw the look of confidence from him that you have never seen before in that entire season. And Trey stepped up when the team needed him to, so I was like, does Trey feel like a little bit disrespected not getting those first team honors or any sort of
He probably used it as motivation.
Yeah.
And any athlete would, any competitor would. And but what's great about Trey Alexander is not only is he can he step up and be a scorer, because he really can at any point in the game. His mid-range game is fire, and he can really shoot the 3 ball. But I love the way that he helps kind of lead this offense in a play style rather than just kind of like a free-for-all.
Yep.
He can really settle down this team in different moments in the game, and he doesn't turn the ball over a lot. And I think that's also a crucial point to his game.
Another guy that doesn't turn the ball over a lot, Ryan Nembhard. I've seen so much growth from him, obviously coming back from horrible injury.
And he's somebody that carried a ton of hype coming into this season.
Exactly. A lot of hype for him too, and he's having to live it up. But what I love about Ryan, and this is honestly an indicator for me that you're a great player, is that maybe you're not having the big scoring nights, but he's putting up 12 assists in one game. That was career high. Super impressive because he's a creator and he's somebody that can really run the point position and get things going for his team. And when you know that you're not doing it just for yourself and, I have these expectations and these preseason honors I need to live up to. No, that guy's just an unselfish basketball player. And that is what's going to make this Creighton team go from good to great, I think, in the late stages in March and April.
And I really love, I know we didn't really touch on him too much yet, but I kind of would love to talk a little bit more about Baylor Shireman and just his initial impact early on this season, because it's hard. It's really hard for a player to leave a program that you've known your entire career and then just say, like, I can play at the highest level. Mm-hmm. I can play with the best of the best. I saw myself do it last year when SDSU made it to the NCAA championship or tournament, and they were, in a lot of brackets, projected to be the upset team.
Yep.
So he knows that, yes, I was a big piece to that, and I can provide that element to another great team, in this case, Creighton, which is awesome to see. But he's got so much confidence in himself and his own abilities. There are times where I watch him play and I'm thinking, like, man, like you look like an unathletic great shooter, right?
Yes.
Just the way that he kind of moves and some of the shots that he takes, and it doesn't like look good coming off the hand, but then he doesn't touch the rim and it just falls right through the wickets. And I'm thinking, like, man, why are you such a good player? And it's just because he's surrounded by other great players too. Mm-hmm. And not to say that when he was at SDSU, he wasn't a great player, because if I'm correct, was he Summit League Player of the Year?
Player of the Year, yep.
Yeah. So it's not to say that he can't be that number one guy. And what local kid? Is he from around?
He's from Aurora, Nebraska.
Yeah. So close by. And this is just somebody that can really take over a game.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw Baylor do that. His shots really weren't falling earlier in the season, but last night
he got hot and he knew it.
He got hot last night, and we asked him about it post game, and he's like, it just felt so good to see one go in. And then after that, the game slows down. And you're like, okay, this is my shot. This is my area of the court that I know I can really hone in on. And Baylor will help Creighton and Greg McDermott get back to the let it fly stage of their program and just literally letting it fly from three. And that's just an identity that Creighton's gone with for a long time, and having that 3 game, because last year they had to play a lot of small ball. They didn't get to have the big 3-point shooters. Yes, they did in some scenarios, but not quite. I mean, compare it historically when you think of Ethan Rogge, Doug McDermott, and what those guys could do back in the Missouri Valley days. But now you're in the Big East, right? And it's totally different game, but Baylor's kind of bringing a little bit of that back and that element back. And you can see the guys gaining more confidence, I think, beyond the arc, because you see Kaluma taking more threes. I think Trey's gotten a little bit more comfortable out there. And then obviously Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Right. And I mean, that dude, he's going to be good in any game they play this year.
Yes.
Any game. And yes, they're going to finally be challenged. Like St. Thomas put up a fight against Creighton, and I knew they would because they, from last year to this year, they were a D3 team last year, right? That got just
2
placed.
years ago,
Well, but they recruited as a D3 team.
Yep.
And they played D1 basketball, but they were D3 bodies.
Yes.
Now they recruited as a D1 team. So I think a lot of people underestimated the Tommies a little bit in that regard. But when you look at the matchups that they have ahead, right? So they have Texas Tech and the Maui Invitational. And if they win that game, then you go on to play either Arkansas, or is it LSU? Is that the other one? I bet it's going to be Arkansas, because Arkansas, they're ranked even higher than Creighton this year. And then it goes on to either playing Arizona, SDSU, or Ohio State. And if you look at the ranking, so Texas Tech would be 26th, Arkansas's 8th. Then you play either Arizona at 16, SDSU at 18, or Ohio State at rank 21. And then after all of that, you have to play Texas, right? Who just took down the Zags.
I can't wait for the Texas game. I'm so excited for that.
I think a lot of people looked into that Texas game and saw more than they probably should have. When you see the number 2 team go down, you're like, wow, this Texas team is awesome. It is, but DB and I talked about it on Morning Dump. It's one of those things where you won't see Carr shoot the ball that well. He got hot in the first half, and that's kind of the direction Texas went. Give the ball to Carr. Then in the second half, it was Tyrese Hunter's show, and it was give the ball to Tyrese Hunter. You didn't really see Dylan Mitchell doing much, and he's the number 4 high school recruit coming out of that class into this year. There were so many NBA scouts at that game just to see him play, and he didn't even have a big game. So there's like kind of a lot of more of like a misfit approach with that Texas team, whereas you look at Creighton and they're just so structurally sound. And I look at that across the board when I see this game against Texas Tech. Yes, they're favored to win. I don't know what it's going to be. If it's going to be like, they're 2.5 point favorites, 3.5. If it gets to 7.5, I think that'd be crazy. But I don't think Creighton struggles at all because they're shooting the ball so well that until they shoot the ball poorly, they're going to keep playing as if they're the best team in the country. For sure.
And we saw a little bit of that adversity in the St. Thomas game. And that's what Coach Mack alluded to in his press conference last night. He was like, hey, I'm glad these guys have faced a little bit of adversity. It was a wake-up call for their first game of the season because they got to see how they respond to that. Obviously, they responded well, won the game. Not in the fashion that Creighton fans wanted to see. Of course, you want to see your team going out looking like the number 10 team, number 9 team in the country.
Too.
Right. And a lot of new guys in the system and in certain spots that maybe they haven't been in the past, especially starting on an opening night. It's different than going into the starting lineup in the middle of the season, right? So I think there was just a lot of growth these past 4 games. I think they're ready for Maui and they're ready for that Invitational and the Power 5 programs that they'll face. I'm just super curious to see how the team will band together when they have to face adversity every other possession.
And you bring up a good point when you say it in that regard because yes, it was against St. Thomas, and it's an easy team to really find a lead against.
Totally.
Whereas if you fall behind against a Texas Tech and Arkansas, any of those other teams that I mentioned, it's harder to fight through that adversity.
Totally.
But the good news about this group is that after that first game, they quickly found their identity. They know what their teammates are good at, and they play to everybody's strengths. So it makes them just an unmatched team, in my opinion.
Andrew, little too early predictions. What do you got for this Creighton team? What do you think their ceiling is?
Well, I bet on them to win the national title, so I hope they win.
Okay. There we go. I love to hear it.
I bet on them. I bet on Kentucky, and I bet on UCLA. Those are my 3 teams.
Okay.
So if anything, that should give people promise and hope that they're making the Final Four.
All right. Love it. Well, It all starts in Maui, Hawaii. The team is heading to San Diego. They left this morning. They're going to stay there, practice at San Diego State, and travel with them over to Maui, and then get going and
smack talk on the plane a little bit.
Smack talk on the plane a little bit. Kaluma's got a brother over there too, so there's a little bit of brotherly.
Did you ask anybody if they're afraid of flying or anything?
No, I didn't. I didn't end up asking that. That's a good question though. None of them seem to have been scared of flying.
Yeah, like nervous at all about the trip.
Yeah, I was talking to them a little bit. I'm like, hey, safe travels. And they're all like, oh yeah, we're so excited. So I think that's the last thing on people's minds.
I can't imagine not being excited to go to Maui.
And if you're really like that scared, I would, get some Benadryl, get some melatonin. You'll be fine. Just fall asleep in your first class. You'll wake up to a nice steak dinner.
Oh, they take first class seats?
They're taking a charter.
Oh, okay.
So no, but
technically first class because you don't have to actually go through a real TSA process.
Ryan Kalkbrenner has to have the exit seat every single time.
Ryan Kalkbrenner needs to have more than just the exit seat.
I was on the plane with them back from March Madness last year when Ryan obviously went down with injury against San Diego State. So he was in I don't know if he was in a boot yet or not, but he had crutches. And I firsthand saw him try to get on a plane, and I was like, my heart dropped. I was like, oh my God, they had to clear an area for him. It's just I
feel like they would have been better off
putting him on a stretcher. I can't imagine being that tall and going into a plane.
You imagine going to the bathroom on the plane, being that tall?
Yeah, there's just no way.
The door in this office would be a Kalkbrenner door. It goes all the way up to our 10-foot ceilings.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Kalkbrenner's lifestyle right there.
The guy is very tall. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. Can't wait to see the Creighton Bluejay team over in Maui. Got some great Power 5 matchups. This has been the Bluejay Breakdown. Thanks so much for listening.